Welcome to this week's Environment Show from the French island of Corsica, this mountainous paradise home to hundreds of kilometres of unspoiled coastline. But the island's position in the middle of the Mediterranean makes it particularly exposed to the perils of pollution, not all of it obvious to the human eye. Stay with us this week as the Environment team is diving into deep water. Coming up this week, we investigate the almost invisible plastic pollution that's choking the Mediterranean. Experts estimate that up to 250 billion microscopic fragments are swarming just beneath the water's surface. Next, deep-sea fishing takes its toll. We report on the damage being done by trawlers that act like bulldozers along the seabed. And finally, repopulating Guadeloupe's coral reefs, a race is on to capture the precious eggs that can be grown in labs and released back into the sea. There's another side to Corsica's coastline, and that's images like this, beaches littered with plastic waste. Much of this has come via a current from North Africa. But while this is known as macroplastic, there's a much less visible but equally sinister threat known as microplastic in the waters behind me. We're travelling with a team of scientists to understand this phenomenon. It's somewhat of a ritual for Johan. At least twice a month in the port of Bastia, he prepares his sampling material. His primary tool, this small fishing net. His target, microplastic.
We'll head out of the port for about an hour, long enough to be able to collect a reasonable amount of microplastic with this fine mesh. We'll capture all the fragments in this section here.
It won't be difficult to find. The Mediterranean is choked with fragments of plastic, sometimes as small as a grain of sand or the tip of a needle. Up to 900,000 particles per square kilometre. Frequently, they're found floating just beneath the surface of the water. Often the particles were once part of a larger plastic object that has been broken down through sunlight or the movement of the sea. In some cases, the microplastic outnumbers plankton by 6 to 1.
We can see some of the microplastic. There's a piece of polystyrene in there, and also a piece of macroplastic in the middle.
From here, the sample is passed on to Francois Galgani, a marine biologist and specialist in microplastic. He and a team of European partners are exploring micro-waste in the region under a project named Mediterranean Endangered. The effect of this almost invisible pollution has only recently attracted serious investigation, and now it's being justified, given early findings on the magnitude of the problem.
So there's at least 2 pieces of microplastic, even 3. There's a plastic particle and also polystyrene in different colours. So it's a representative sample.
This is what a sample looks like close up. In purple, a cotton swab surrounded by pieces of polystyrene and plastic fragments. In this next slide, a synthetic fibre can be seen here in blue.
Scientists have shown up to 20 to 30% of the microplastic we find is made up of synthetic fibres that have been released when clothes are washed in washing machines, several million cycles every day.
This tiny plastic is then eaten by fish and other animals, with research now looking at how it might enter the food chain. While most studies are focused on the sea, there's also evidence the waste is prevalent on our shores. But whether it's in water or sand, the prospects of cleaning it are discouraging.
The only solution is prevention. For example, by making packaging from natural products that degrade quickly and without an effect on the environment. But there's no way to clean it. It's technically impossible.
There is, however, some room for optimism. While enormous supplies of microplastic still exist in the Mediterranean, the amount being added each year is no longer on the rise. There's other ways to measure the health of our seas, including the number and quality of our fish. But again, man is responsible for some grim statistics. 3/4 of the world's fish stocks are being harvested faster than they can reproduce. Much of the worst overfishing is being done at deep depths. This next report shows the damage being done by trawlers, which act like bulldozers along the seabed. Down here, 1,000 metres below sea level, life is sparse. Far from sunlight, the fish have adapted. Bigger eyes to see in the dark and a slower life cycle than nearer the surface. Some species can live hundreds of years. So when bottom trawlers rip life from the depths, these animals can't repopulate fast enough, especially not when their habitat has been gouged out by the fishermen's nets.
It's a bit like a bulldozer. It's a huge mouth that scours the deep and takes everything in its path. There isn't a single animal that's fast enough to escape a net this big.
Deep sea fishing is now highly regulated. Barely back in the harbour after 9 days at sea, this trawler's 30-ton haul is being carefully checked by inspectors.
There are quotas for several of these species, so we have to top them up and make sure that what they declare is true.
Once the green light's been given, the fish is brought on shore, ready to be sorted under the boss's watchful eye. He recognises that there were abuses, but says it happened 30 years ago when this type of fishing started, and that it's a thing of the past.
Clearly, we went too far, and that's why fishing activity has been cut by 70%. So there are almost no boats doing this anymore. That's why the quotas have been drastically slashed. Some species were forbidden from fishing altogether, and rightly so.
As well as a decrease in activity, the fishermen's nets now have bigger holes to let the smaller fish escape. But this is too little too late, according to the scientists. They've discovered that almost all the cold water coral has disappeared off the coast of Brittany, swept away by the nets.
A coral reef is a fragile structure that's made up of species with a slow life cycle, and they'll take decades or even centuries to recover from this.
Fishing experts are now asking for a number of large expanses of the seabed to become off-limits to deep-sea trawlers, a concept that already exists in Norway and Ireland. Diving in Corsica is popular, and among the attractions for these divers is the chance at a glimpse at precious red coral. While it's necessary to dive deeper than before, reserves are not yet endangered. However, that's not the case in Guadeloupe, where nearly 1/3 of the coral reef is dead. However, scientists may have found a way to repopulate the reef, although time is not on their side.
A rainbow of colors. The coral reefs of Guadeloupe are home to countless exotic fish, but only a few hundred meters away, the reef is in agony. The culprit? Pollution, overfishing, and climate change. 1/3 of Guadeloupe's reef is dead, and the consequences go beyond endangering marine life.
The coral plays a very important role, because the sea swells break on the reefs instead of on the shore. So if the barrier were to disappear, the island's coastline and cities would be affected.
Scientists may have found a way to bring back life to the damaged reefs. At nightfall, with huge nets, they go out hunting for coral eggs. For believe it or not, coral is a marine animal, one that is susceptible to the mysteries and whims of reproduction. For just 2 days around full moon, from July to September, and for only 15 minutes as the sun sets, the coral spawns thousands of tiny white eggs. In a race against the clock, the scientists gather as many eggs as they can. Back in the lab, they are fertilized and grown on artificial structures before being re-released into the sea.
To give you an idea, after doing these procedures, we have roughly 500,000 to 600,000 larvae, which is huge. The goal is to have 20 to 25% of them develop.
It will take several years to find out how successful the transplants are. But scientists warn that pollution and global warming still need to be addressed. Otherwise, they say that their work will have been in vain.
While 3/4 of the waste we find in the sea is attributed to land-based activities, a whopping 6 million tonnes comes from boats. That brings us to the end of this special edition from Corsica. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. We look forward to seeing you, as always, next time.